But I'd say culturally, we're not too dissimilar. I would say Aussies generally, we probably present as a little bit laid back sometimes, but still very, very passionate.
Hello and welcome to the Auto Ethnographer. I'm John Stech, your host on this journey. We travel the globe to bring you stories about culture and the global automotive industry. Fasten your seatbelt and let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Auto Ethnographer. I'm really pleased to have this week as a guest, Jess Bala, Managing Director of General Motors Australia and New Zealand. She's been in the role for 2 years and is currently launching the Cadillac brand as an all-electric brand down under. Nobody is better suited for this than Jess, as a 13-year veteran of product planning. She knows the product inside out. A native of Australia, Jess spent a decade in the United States at General Motors headquarters in a variety of product planning roles, including electric vehicles, C-segment cars, mid-sized trucks and vans, and ultimately, the director of Cadillac product planning and product marketing, which perfectly suited her in preparation for her current role. Now she's back in Australia, and we'll talk about her experiences working in and with the Americans. Jess, welcome to this week's episode.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's great to be here.
The good news is that our time zones are not so spread out, so it's fairly convenient for both of us.
Absolutely. Although I'd rather be in Thailand with you right now than cold Melbourne.
I can imagine. That's right. It is wintertime down there. I keep talking about summertime on my podcast. Let's go back and talk a little bit about your origin story in the automotive industry. How did you first find yourself drawn to the industry? How did Jess Bala, jump into the automotive industry? Was there a particular moment or an influence that brought you in?
Yeah, I mean, some of my earliest memories as a child go back to always attending the local auto shows and car shows with my dad and his best mate at the time, and always just spending hours looking around cars. And if I'm completely honest, that wasn't something, when you're going through high school and even through early years at university, saw it as an industry I was going to go in. I always wanted to be a doctor and follow in my father's footsteps, ended up doing law, so obviously very different again, but was actually walking to my car at Monash University here in Melbourne and stumbled across a careers fair where Holden was advertising what was its co-op program, so sort of like a student intern program. And obviously Holden at the time, and still is, probably the most iconic auto brand here locally in Australia and New Zealand. And it was just something that I was drawn to and thought, you know what, this is really different from anything I've done in the last few years, the sort of jobs and different internships I've done during my studying. Let's have a go at this and see if I have the chance to work for one of the biggest brands in Australia. And it was really like a bit of a sliding doors moment. And now the rest is history, and I wouldn't have changed a thing.
It sounds actually very similar to my accidental beginning in the auto industry as well. I was a chemist in the beginning of my career. You mentioned Holden. It's a brand that General Motors unfortunately wound down while you were away in the United States. How did working with that brand prepare you for your automotive ventures ahead? Because you were working with that brand for a couple of years before you went to the US.
Yeah, I was. I'd been at Holden for about 6 years before I headed stateside with Detroit to join General Motors at the HQ. And, at the time, obviously, Holden had been in its prime. The Commodore was the best-selling car in the country for so long. And even still to this day, the brand's talked about very affectionately within General Motors. It was a very iconic brand that had an amazing engineering and design center here. And a lot of great General Motors and Holden talent from Down Under did end up over in Michigan. And I would say working for the brand in Australia and sort of being, a big fish in a small pond before going over and becoming a very small fish in really an ocean when I got over to Detroit, really set myself up because I was able to understand how the company worked, obviously on a much smaller scale. But then it wasn't starting completely afresh when I got over there. And I think that definitely helped. And coming from an organisation here in Australia that had such a breadth of opportunities when you were working here really set me up and put me in good stead to really hit the ground running once I landed in Detroit.
Oh, that's fascinating. Just that intersect between the two companies. So how would you define Holden? Clearly, it was an Australian brand sold, I believe, only in Australia. Would you say that in terms of the culture of the company, it was truly an Australian company, or was there a heavy influence coming across from the United States?
Oh, look, I mean, to your point, Holden was only sold in Australia and New Zealand, but we did export cars from here around the world. So, for example, the Holden Commodore SS went as the Chevy SS over to the US and other parts around the world. So we were definitely very much part of the parent company, but also being the ones that knew our market the best, were able to influence our market the best as well. So, yes, we're part of a much bigger organisation, and there are practices and processes that go along with that. But I would say, especially with the car that was built and manufactured and engineered here locally, we were allowed to have a lot of governance over that, which was really exciting.
So you had your early product planning days in your career with Holden. Was there a lot of interface then with the US at that time with regards to other products that were being developed in the US for other markets, or was that something that was really purely oriented towards the Australian market at that time?
No, I mean, I was involved in several products at that time. So in my final role at Holden before I went over to the US, I was the product planner for the VF Commodore. So I'm lucky enough to call that car my baby, and obviously knowing where it ended from there. So, but it was an amazing program to be on and be able to be part of that launch with the media here right before I left. But then I was also involved with the Colorado, as well as the Holden tracks that did very well here in Australia and New Zealand as well. And with those products as we call home-roomed from other markets within General Motors, whether it be Korea, South America, Detroit itself, that meant I had regular interaction with people within the company in other parts of the world. And that meant that by the time I got over to Detroit, I wasn't going over knowing no one. I already had a fairly decent, albeit small, but decent network that I could tap into the minute I landed to sort of help me navigate the much bigger operation that is General Motors.
So let's take that opportunity then to do that Pacific crossing, and let's talk about your move to Detroit. What would you say struck you the most personally or professionally about the cultural shift when you first landed?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of, people just assume, well, you're going from one English speaking country to another. It can't really be that different. But I would say that's not always the case. Fundamentally, the job was obviously very similar, just with a lot more layers to get the work done once I got to headquarters. But I'd say personally, some of the biggest differences were just sort of, I think Australians very much have this nature where work almost blends into personal life. You build these amazing personal friendships with the people you work with. Often you go out for after work drinks and things like that. I found there was a bit more of a segregation in the US, whereas work was work and personal life was personal life. Obviously, there are always exceptions to that, but that was definitely something that sort of struck me as a little bit different when I first got over there. But I think, really going to Michigan, I couldn't be any further away from home than possible. And that became quite evident as things happened globally. You think about COVID and things in my time over there and being so far from home. But then at the same time, being so incredibly thankful for technology, things like FaceTime and all of those allowed me to keep very much in touch with the people I needed to back at home. But I'd say even on a professional level, the big differences I felt between the two, I guess, regions or countries from an operating standpoint is Holden being so much smaller at the time made the different levels of leadership very accessible. I think that in Australia, we very much respect hierarchy, but it's still something that's attainable. And it's something I try and practice with my team here now, that my door is always open. You can come and talk to me about anything. I want the whole team to be part of the conversation and the decision and take everyone on the journey. Not that that's not the case in the US. It was just more that it's a much bigger company with a lot more layers. So getting access to obviously higher up the company became a longer process and often could be a little bit more difficult.
So then there was clearly a difference in the decision-making process. So it was more layered, as you say, and perhaps a little bit more complex because of those layers, simply from the size of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's the size of the organization, sorry, here and especially now locally, I think it allows us to be quite nimble and we can act quite quickly for those decisions that impact us directly. Obviously, there are decisions that we need to still be a part of from either a regional or a global level, and we absolutely do that. But I think having that time in the US and now being able to bring that experience back home, it allows me to have that lens as to understand how we as a bigger company make some of those decisions and how long it might take us to get somewhere versus escalating at the right time and things like that.
Oh, that's great. Did you find any, let's say, personal differences in the decision-making process, like how you had to put an argument together or, build a case in terms of taking a decision that you were pushing for?
I'd say probably one of the biggest differences I found, and it wasn't huge by any magnitude, was just the delivery. I think Australians, we're pretty direct, straight to the point, but also a little bit more laid back in some elements. So often I would just bring things forward and sort of get straight into the discussion. This is what we're trying to achieve today. Here are the points. Here are the potential issues. Let's make a decision and sort of really try and jump through it versus going through a full-blown presentation. But I will say, in my role working as Chief of Staff for Mary Barra, our CEO, that was something I definitely saw her try and implement as well. Let's get to the decision quickly. Let's only go through what we need to talk about because obviously we're in so many meetings a day and we need to move quite rapidly with an industry that's moving so quickly as well around us. Making those decisions really quickly is critical to being successful as well.
So operating at that kind of a level with this, basically directly with the CEO, you obviously had quite a broad view of the company and the industry. Did that have any big impact on your view of the industry when you saw it from this kind of a high level?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always knew it was complex, but that role gave me the viewpoint of sort of the policy that we go through as well, and the real global nature. And what I loved about that role the most was just being able to sit in with Mary and her senior leadership team and just listen. And that was really the intent of the role. Understand how the top people in the company make their decisions and how they pivot so quickly from topic to topic, depending on what's going on at the time. It could be product related, comms related, policy and government related to other regional topics. And we just had to pivot so quickly, and being able to watch that team be so skilled in that area and just jump around so quickly and make decisions and move on was really amazing. And, what I love about this industry so much is that we're really shaping how people get from A to B every day. And we talk about how we're going through the biggest transformation since horse and cart to, ICE engine to what we're seeing now. And being able to have an impact on how people will adopt to that and how they will get around is really cool. So being able to see that at that CEO level view was amazing.
So that must have obviously had an impact then on your kind of day-to-day product planning activities. You were a product planner before, then you worked in this executive staff, and then you went back to product planning. What kind of, let's say, new lens did you have on working on product planning after being in that executive support position?
Yeah, I think it really helped with determining priorities and what we should be focusing on in the short, mid and long term, knowing where the company and our senior leadership team wanted to get to in, say, even the next 12 months to 5 years to 10 years really helped as the Cadillac team and I were laying out what our product portfolio should look like and the level of flexibility we wanted to build into that as the industry is changing so much. So it helped me with understanding what I should really maybe push more heavily for, where I may need to sort of let some things go, and when to be comfortable to be, in some forums in that role, I would go in and actually be the lowest level person in the room, but knowing what I had learned in the role previously, know when to speak up and not to, and just sort of having the ability to read the room, I think definitely helped.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that must certainly be appreciated by the product teams that you worked with in terms of being able to get things pushed through. How did you?
Yeah, absolutely.
How did your role then evolve with regards to adapting products or strategy to international markets? Because now you've got this more global view. You've been in Australia, you're in the US, you're looking at other markets. Obviously, you have to kind of turn off the Australian hat a little bit, take it off, and look with some other hats on. How did that work for you? How did you evolve into this kind of a product adaptation role?
Yeah, and I think the main thing is always keeping the customer at the center of everything that we do. They're our end customer. We need to build vehicles that they want and that they see value in. And especially in Cadillac, it's about that emotional connection. Such an iconic brand, especially in the US, but now growing globally as well. When you look across the industry and how many brands are out there, and it really the choice that the customer has, part of it is how do you differentiate yourself from the competition? And how do you really draw that emotional connection between the customer and the vehicle? So we spent a lot of time doing research, talking to customers from very early on stages, sort of from ideation to conception of vehicles all the way through to actually launching them, because preferences change. The industry changes quite quickly. So we need to be nimble enough to keep up with that. But if we don't have the customer at the center of what we're trying to do, it's just not going to work. So I think that was really the pinpoint, and then pulling on all of our global colleagues to really lean on them and trust their expertise as to they know their market and their customer best. And so what are their priorities? What are their unique selling points that we need to build into these vehicles globally?
Let's then zoom in just a little bit to the Australian customer, since you're talking about consumers. What would you say are some specific differences in vehicle expectations between American and Australian consumers? We know that historically, Australia was very famous for the high-powered V8, drivetrains, utes, which probably nobody else on the planet knows what it is. And I'll have to drop that into the notes later unless you want to explain it. And of course, Americans are famous for eating and drinking in the car and the requirement for more cup holders than people. Are there any things that might surprise us between Australian and American customers and what their preferences are?
I think from a content and spec of a vehicle level, there weren't too many big differences. I think when you think about Australia in particular, I think of us as quite an edgy and sort of fashion-forward market in general. We like our vehicles, regardless of segment, brand, etc., to almost be an extension of ourselves and represent ourselves. And that's why I love Cadillac and the direction that brand is going for our market here is such an edgy, fashion-forward car with the detail and things. That's why I think it suits our market so well. But I'd say from a content standpoint, there isn't a whole lot of difference. I would say Australians and New Zealand customers are quite techie. We're a bit more advanced in that aspect as to what we expect from a technology standpoint in our vehicles. But I'd say it's almost the flip side back the other way, trying to explain to my American colleagues that when I was there that, we don't have the same range of product here, but yet we have more brands available here. And it's sort of trying to get them to really understand that we might be a smaller market, but there's more brand choice. And so how we go to market needs to be a little bit different as well. So I'd say it's on that level where it's different versus the actual cars themselves.
No, it certainly is a complex market in terms of the number of brands. It's I would argue it's one of the most internationalized markets
it is
on the planet,
yes.
Given from where the various products and brands are coming.
Absolutely.
When you were in Detroit, was there ever a moment when you felt that your, let's call it, I know it's not a word, but Australianness brought something unique to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that was very much pointed out to me when I started, and on reflection, it is definitely true, that when you're in Australia, we tend to be more generalists. So if you think about our careers at companies, I know it's not as much of a done thing these days to sort of have your whole career at a company, but we tend to move around a lot internally. And I think back through my career of, almost 18 years now at GM overall, I haven't really stayed in a role for more than 2.5 years at a time. And a lot of that was done here in Australia locally. So you get a lot of exposure, whereas when you go over to the US, there seems to be a lot more of, well, I've found my place and I want to stay in this role or this function for my career. But it's interesting because when I got put into the Cadillac job I had at the end of my time there, part of the reason was you've got such broad experience. So you have a big network, you know how the company operates across different functions, and that's a real advantage. So I would say Australians tend to be more generalists, whereas I found that a lot of Americans would be more specialists.
That's a very interesting comparison, actually. I like that that comparison. So then let's fast forward slightly. You returned home back to Australia 2 years ago as the managing director, and personally, I've always found that to be the most fun job that I ever held in my career. The managing director of one or several markets. Can you tell us a little bit about how your time abroad maybe reshaped how you lead, how you approached leadership coming back into your home country?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the biggest benefits of my time in the US with the company that I've been able to leverage back here is just helping my team understand how some of these decisions are made, why I might not escalate some things and while I'll push hard on others. Just understanding the internal, I would say, politics and layers and processes has definitely helped. Plus with, when you're launching not just a new brand, but we've also just launched a new car under our GM specialty vehicles with the GMC Yukon. And obviously launches are quite complex. There's systems, there's vehicles, there's marketing, there's the distribution, there's everything. And so obviously things pop up, there are hurdles and things like that. And just having the network that I developed over my 10 years in the US means I can generally get us solutions and answers pretty quickly. I remember before I got over there, you'd go on the intranet with all the employees and trying to navigate your way around hundreds of thousands of people to find the person to answer your question. Generally now I know at least the function to go to if I don't know the person. And if I don't, I know someone that will know the person. So I think just helping the team move quickly is definitely the biggest asset. And I think from my leadership style specifically, obviously I've worked for many, many people over my time at GM, and you learn the things that you appreciate and maybe don't like as much from different leadership styles. And for me, I'm very much someone that's, personable, builds relationships, really values that personal connection. And that's something I've tried to remind the team, from the moment I got back. And I was lucky. There was a large portion of the team that was still here from when I was here 10 years prior, which did make the transition a lot more easier, but also hopefully made, the role of MD a little bit less intimidating to the broader organization, which is what I'm trying to instill with them as well. It's ignore the title. You can come and talk to me about anything at any time, and my door is always open. So hopefully they would agree with that, but it's something we definitely try and hone in on personally.
No, that's really great. I mean, it sounds like you're very valuable with the experience that you brought back and the network that you brought back. And it sounds like you're also a valuable, let's say, bridge between your Australian team and helping them to communicate back to the headquarters and understand what's going back on over there.
Yes, definitely.
Are there any let's say company practices that you've chosen to kind of localize or in a way ossify since reuniting and returning to Australia? Things that didn't make sense in from the headquarters that you had to change around a bit?
I can't think of anything directly. I'd say one thing that I do try and get the team practice around is, part of a global company. And obviously we do a lot of discussions and meetings on different topics and things like that. And more from my learning in my chief of staff role is just to educating the team and getting them to be very much straight to the point. Often less is more. When we're preparing slides and presentation material, let's just get straight to the point and try and jump into the discussion first versus being presented to, because I think that's when both my team here can learn, but also those that we're talking to in other parts of the globe can learn as well, because it just frees up more of that discussion versus being talked at. And I think that's a really valuable lesson both ways, because it generates discussion, ideation, different ways of looking at things, different viewpoints, plus also gives my team here the opportunity to showcase their skills and passion back to leadership in other parts of the world as well.
So it sounds like between your experience, your network, and how you've been developing your local team over the last 2 years, you're really building some momentum for this important Cadillac brand, let's say, launch or relaunch in Australia. And in fact, and in New Zealand, excuse me, as an electric vehicle only brand. Can you talk a little bit about the launch, how that's going, and how this return of Cadillac is working in Australia?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the first time Cadillac's been sold in Australia and New Zealand. So it's really exciting to be able to bring almost this next generation of vehicles to Australia. And what's amazing about it is when you look at the team back in the US, whether it's myself, Michael Simcoe, Travis Hester, there's been a lot of Aussies that have had a hand in this next generation of Cadillacs, which is really nice when you think about what's going on locally and the automotive talent that we still have around the world. But these cars in particular, they're just stunning. The people that are getting in them, the customers that we're acquiring, are blown away by the attention to detail and that luxury fit and finish that have gone into these cars. So we've got some beautiful stores. We know that we're opening across the 2 countries. The Lyric is on sale right now, and then early next year, we have the privilege of also launching the Lyric V-Series, the Optic, and also the Vistic, all around the time of Cadillac's first ever F1 race, which will be locally here in Melbourne the first weekend of March. So there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening for the brand right now.
It's really coming together then, especially with the Formula One that really anchors a lot of timelines, and things have to happen by a very specific point.
Yeah, it's very exciting, really exciting.
How is the adaptation or the adoption of the Australian customer towards the electric vehicle drivetrain? I mean, again, they were very famous and well known for the V8. It's quite a far cry to move over to an electric drivetrain.
Yeah, it is. And there's lots of discussions happening within the industry. When you think about EVs generally, obviously there's the vehicle side of it, but beyond that, there's the infrastructure side. And when you think about our country geographically, obviously it comes with challenges when you think about range and charging and things like that. So there's definitely an education process that goes along with these vehicles. So it's not just selling the brand, but it's sort of selling a lifestyle at the same time. And we've spent a lot of time as a team talking through that. Yes, there are people that are still not comfortable for their personal reasons to make the EV shift, but then there are others that have been in EVs for some time and will never go back to a non-EV variant of vehicle. So it's definitely a combination of both. And obviously we see a lot of EV brands and EV-only brands launching in Australia as well. So while the sort of EV adoption rate it's still growing, but it has slowed, we think it's only going to pick up again as more of these entries come into market.
No, that's definitely going to be a big challenge, I think, from what I can see. Again, going back to the fact that Australia is one of the most globalized markets on the planet with regards to brands. That's probably one of the few places on the planet where the Cadillac brand will really bump into the competing Chinese brands, for example, other than in mainland China.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to that piece around, making sure we differentiate ourselves from a lot of the competition as well.
Let's dive a little bit into moving away from the cars a little bit, talk a little bit more about some of the culture. You made a big decade-long, I'll say it in quotes, visit to the United States as an Australian. What advice would you give to Australians that are either working in American firms back home, or that would take that decision to go live in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when I think back to that moment. I applied for a role thinking there's not a chance they're going to pick a little Aussie employee from the other side of the world to go over to headquarters, and the rest is sort of history. And it was meant to only be 3 years, and to your point, it turned into 10, and that time flew. And it was without a doubt one of the most amazing and best things I'd done. Had there been hard times, especially at the start? Definitely. But being able to be at headquarters of one of the big three auto companies and, a Fortune 500 company and everything that comes along with that was just amazing. So plus, I think you've also got to think about the personal element of it. You get to live in another country and that comes with its own benefits. Obviously, it's always hard being away from home, but just being able to experience, to your point, another culture and the travel and everything else that goes along with that. So I would say without a doubt it was one of the best things that I've done, for sure. Being able to work at a global company, I think, opens up a lot of opportunities. You get to learn about other cultures, you get to interact with other cultures and see how the differences between markets apply. And also it gives you different viewpoints as to how other brands and other markets do things as well, all of which I think are great learnings when you especially come back to such a multicultural country like ours here in Australia. It's only going to benefit you.
So speaking of multicultural countries in Australia, being Australia, what advice could you give to an American who is looking at coming to Australia to work?
Yeah, it's funny. The minute that it was announced that I was coming back to this role, I was inundated with colleagues from the US asking, if you ever have job openings out there, let me know. We want to come and visit and I'd love to go live there. So there's no shortage of those requests still, even 2 years later. But I would say, obviously the best skills you could bring back with you is obviously the viewpoints that you would usually have from the headquarters in the other parts of the world, but know that you're coming into usually a smaller environment, but that means that the benefits there are often that we can move very quickly. We can be more nimble, more agile, and those two things together often just only lead to success.
Is there one particular point that you think the two cultures could learn something from each other? And any one thing you noticed where there's enough of a difference that they could do some learning?
Oh, that's a good one. To be honest, I think they go very well hand in hand. And what I really have enjoyed about both working here and in the US is just the exposure to the different people, especially in a company the size of General Motors. So I'd say our cultures are fairly similar. I think they just both have, differences versus being in a much larger organization over there and how they tackle and view hierarchy versus here. We're still very respectful, but, see it as more attainable and I guess more accessible than what it might be when you go over to the much larger companies in the US. But I'd say culturally, we're not too dissimilar. I would say Aussies generally, we probably present as a little bit laid back sometimes, but still very, very passionate. And, I think looking at the team that I've got here now in Australia, after everything that a lot of them have been through the last decade, within our company here, and to still be here just shows just how passionate they really are about our company and our product, which is really amazing.
Kind of stepping back and looking, you've done some really great things, starting with Holden, working through product planning in Australia and the US, rising up and working directly in the staff of the CEO of General Motors, Mary Barra, and then leading the product planning for Cadillac brand, and now returning home to Australia and leading the company there. What do you hope to be your legacy in the industry? What do you hope to represent, both from an Australian perspective and perhaps even a global one?
Yeah, I think one thing I've always taken with me throughout my career is to almost just to trust the process. Everything within work has happened for a reason, and when I look at all the roles that I've had, it's funny to think that there's only two in my time that I actually actively applied for, and that's the role that got me into Holden as an intern, and then the role that moved me to the US. Everything else has sort of been my mentors and my sponsors saying, based on your skill set and maybe the gaps you've got, this is the role that we think you should do next to help with your growth path. So I often tell the team, really trust that and build an amazing network that can help you move that forward, regardless of what country you're in. I think that applies everywhere, and is definitely something I try and now pay forward to those on my team, either here or those that I actually still mentor back in the US as well. And a lot of the team here in Australia haven't had the opportunity to go work in in the Detroit headquarters. So I always say, if there's an area you're interested in, let me know. I'll talk to you about it. I'll introduce you to the team over there. You can build your own network and see where it leads you. But I think it all comes back to sort of opening those doors for people, just like they were opened for me.
So it sounds to me like your legacy is very much a legacy of a networker, somebody that helps your organization helps other people, which of course always, if you believe in karma, helps yourself as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So as we kind of get down to the last minutes, I wonder if you had any particular message that you would want to give to the listeners, something that you picked up or learned along the way that you thought could be some good advice all around for people who are looking at working either outside of their country or working with a foreign company in their home country with regards to this intercultural relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main takeaway that I've had over my career at GM and my experience living overseas, but even both when I was in the US and in my roles in Australia, working with so many other countries and colleagues in other countries as well, is just embrace it. It is an amazing opportunity and an amazing asset you have to be able to do that. And if you get presented the opportunity to move overseas, funnily enough, the day that we announced the Holden that I was moving to Detroit was the same day that Detroit announced bankruptcy, and someone kindly left Time magazine with the picture of the Rensen on my desk saying, Detroit bankrupt. But you know what? I wouldn't have changed a thing, because I always knew that if I had made that move and it didn't pan out as well as it did, I always had somewhere to come back to. And I think that's something to really keep in front of you. Change is always a good thing, and growing those experiences is a good thing. And I like to think that my experiences are definitely helping my team here with what we have to do. And any chance you've got to grow and meet more people and learn new processes are always going to benefit you in the long run.
No, those are very wise words for sure. I totally agree with you that, you went over there during really the beginning of very turbulent times, that it's you learn a lot more on stormy days than you learn on sunny days.
100% agree.
Well, thank you very much for joining the Auto Ethnographer today, Jess. It was a really great conversation. You shared a lot of insights about your experience both in Australia, in the US, and then returning back to Australia with respect to the culture working within a large organization. I'm sure the listeners will take a lot from today's episode.
Yeah, thanks so much again, John, for having me. And if my little snippets of info help anyone else with the decision to make a big move like that across the other side of the world, then it was definitely valuable. But I owe a lot of my success to my mentors, sponsors, colleagues, and friends. I couldn't have done any of this without them.
No, that's great. I love the humility and recognizing that your success is in the hands of many other people as well. So with that, what I'll do, I'd like to thank the listeners for joining us this week. I'm sure you picked up a lot of information and a lot of interesting insights about Australia and the US with regards to the products and especially about the culture from a person who cannot possibly know it better. So with that, we'll see you next week on the Auto Ethnographer. Keep on driving. Thank you for joining us on today's journey. Please remember to like and subscribe to the Auto Ethnographer and leave us a rating or comment. For more information, visit our website at auto-ethnographer.com. You can also follow on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.